Yeah, I think this might be the least creative title in the entire Star Trek franchise. Conundrum. I mean, they might as well just call this Dilemma, or Problem, or Hey, I think something's wrong. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Conundrum, which is episode 14 of season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win the latest user poll for Star Trek The Next Generation is the least creative episode title ever made. Ooh, I think something's wrong here. I mean Conundrum. So Conundrum's the episode where the Enterprise crew loses their memory entirely, and the computer is sort of crashes and doesn't really tell them much of who there is, and it's invaded by this alien species who did it, and he impersonates Picard's first officer, Lieutenant Kieran McDuff. DUFF MAN. Anyway, McDuff did this in order to defeat an alien race that his race is at war with. So they make the Enterprise crew believe that they're at war with this race, but then eventually the crew figures out that they're winning the war way too easily, and they defeat DUFF MAN and get their memories back. So I don't know. I guess I heard some people really like this episode. To me, it's okay. Like, it's always been it's okay average episode. I mean, but watching it, like, for this review and analyzing it and really giving this episode a lot of consideration, I like it less. It's still in the okay range for me, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's a terrible episode, but I can see flaws. Now, there's a lot of logical flaws that are blaring, but here's the truth. Here is the truth of the matter. There can be episodes with logical flaws that are blaring that I still love, that still have, like, the character stories, the acting, and the situations, and the commentary and stuff, like, are so good they overrule that. The episode that immediately comes to mind is Past Tense from Deep Space Nine, which I love, but the time travel logic in that episode is complete nonsense. But with this episode, I don't think there's enough there to override. I think, and that's the thing, when, at least for me, when logical, practical issues, like, really bother me, it's because the rest of the episode doesn't make up for it. And so I just think about it a bit more. Now, as I said, I don't think this is a terrible episode. It's an interesting concept that the crew lose their memories, and they have collective amnesia. I honestly think that they could have done a lot more with this concept than what they did. I think this is kind of the lazy man's version of this concept, if I'm being completely honest. Like, it's not terrible, it's passable because it's an interesting concept, but it's really not that creative, just like the episode title. Now, I had just read, and I just found this out, I didn't know this before, that the original pitch for this episode, unclear, sorry, the original pitch for this episode, so you got a Star Trek episode for me? Yes, sir, I do. Sorry, I'm going to stop that now. But the original pitch for this episode was that it had less to do with the crew losing their memories and more to do, well, it kind of did, but it had to do with an alien sort of using memory erasure to indoctrinate or recruit like people for their fight, which I can see elements of that in here. But that actual storyline much more resembles what they did in the Star Trek Voyager episode Nemesis, which I must say was a much better episode than this one. um, and it's interesting that that was the original pitch because they steered away from that. Instead, they did this instead, and this is kind of the lesser version. Now, the other thing I heard about this original idea was that they had originally had 3 amnesia episodes for season 4. This one, Clues, and Future Imperfect, and so they did Clues and Future Imperfect, obviously, but they decided to push this one back because they were a bit. This one they didn't have nailed down, so eventually they came back to it in season 5, probably because there was a time crunch and they needed to come up with something right away. And so yeah, and I do feel that they never fully mastered it, and I think what they eventually did with this pitch in season 4 Voyager with a Nemesis, they finally mastered. Like, that's the correct version of this story idea. Like, that was an amazing episode. This one, I kind of feel like they kind of half-assed it. Now, a lot of people like this episode for the character interactions, but I wasn't completely blown away by the character interactions, to be honest. Like, apparently Ronald D. Moore and several people in the writing staff, and I believe Jonathan Frakes and Michelle Forbes themselves, liked this episode most for the love triangle storyline between Ro, Riker, and Troi, and they think that's what works best about this episode. But honestly, I didn't really care for it. Now here's the thing. Like, first of all, I mean, I can understand the concept, because the concept is before they lose the memories, they show Ro and Riker arguing and they hate each other and like, oh, I want to do this, you want to do blah, blah, blah. And then they lose their memories, and then all of a sudden they're like flirting with each other all the time, and they ended up hooking up. Now, I admit that's kind of an interesting concept, because the point is that they're kind of implying that there was sexual tension between Ro and Riker, which is part of the reason why they were so pissy with each other. And the other point is that, like, if you remove the context, because they had this history of not liking each other, because Riker, if you remember back to the episode in Samara when she first came on board, Riker was very much against this. He didn't want this person. What the hell is this criminal doing on my crew? And so he was very antagonistic towards her for the start. And so from her perspective, Riker was just another one of those asshole Starfleet, who thumb their nose at her and think they're way better than her. And so she hated him from the start. So they had this history of not liking each other. So even after she joined the crew, there was still a lot of tension between them from that history. But with the memory eraser, that erases that history, and they're just two people. And it shows that if they actually basically it's the saying of we got off on the wrong foot. And it's showing that they did at first, but if they actually got off on the correct foot, things would go different and would actually really like each other. And I do like that concept. So don't get me wrong, I don't think the love triangle was the worst thing ever, but the fact they made it a love triangle with Troi, I thought was dumb. I gotta be honest. That wasn't doing it for me. I mean, they were trying to say because Troi lost her memories and her empathic powers could tell her that Will was someone that she loved, and her empathic powers tell her that this war seemed off and not right. But her empathic powers didn't tell her that DUFF MAN was fucking lying and an alien. She couldn't figure that part out, so her fucking powers are useless. Anyway, but back to the love triangle. Like, I thought it was silly. And also, as a fan of Ensign Ro, and I've stated this recently in another video, and I stand by this, she is one of my favorite characters. I love Michelle Forbes as an actress. I think she's an amazing actress. Like, I think everything she's in, she blows it out of the water. Kind of, it makes me really disappointed that she didn't want to keep doing Star Trek, because they wanted her back. But she's like, no, I'm going to become a movie star. And she was in one independent movie that most people never heard of, and then kind of went back to doing TV. So I don't know. It is disappointing, but it was a decent movie though. California with Brad Pitt and David Duchovny, Juliette Lewis. Look it up. Anywho, what was I saying? So, so anyway, yeah. So back to Ensign Ro. So she's one of my favorite characters, and I don't like her with Riker. I think it's because Riker's like the ladies man, the ho ho ho, and I gotta be honest, like the sort of tough, rebellious type character that Ro was. I think Riker's not the right fit for her. I think she's too good for Riker. to be very clear, I think she would fit better with someone like Geordi. So that's why I liked the next phase where they had a lot of interactions between Ro and Joy. I thought there was a lot of chemistry there, but they never took it in a romantic direction. I mean, partly because Ro barely appeared after that. I think that was kind of one of her last episodes before she disappeared. So, yeah, but I just don't like the idea with her with Riker. I don't think it works. So, I mean, I get what they were going for with, oh, they hate each other, now they love each other, but I didn't quite buy that she would have the hot for him like that. Also, I just said that I liked the concept of having two people hate each other and then they end up loving each other. That's actually, I don't know, I kind of like the amnesia part of it, but it is too much of a cliche. And I think it does come off as too much of a cliche. There was that movie like Overboard or whatever, when there was a rich stuck-up woman that hated this common guy and she lost her memory and he convinced her that they were married. I don't know, it's just the whole concept of it. It seemed very telegraphed too, like the way that he showed him at the start of the episode, arguing with each other, and then they're hooking up. Oh, you see, they are hating each other, and now they're hooking up. It seemed a bit too telegraphed, a bit too like, oh, look at this, and as I said, a bit too cliche. So ultimately, I didn't like the love triangle, and so if that's the highlight of the episode, I don't think there's much to this episode. Now, let me get back to the main issues I have with this episode, though, because I mentioned logical flaws. You might be like, well, what are these logical flaws you speak of, Mark? Well, let me lay out the plot of this episode. So, this alien race called the Sutherlands, or the Suttons, or something like that, the one that DUFF MAN is from. Anyway, they apparently have the technology to selectively wipe out the memories of the entire crew of the Enterprise, which is made up of mostly humans, but many different aliens from many different species all over the galaxy. They're able to selectively wipe the memories so that they don't remember specific details about who they are, but they have retained memory of their skills and how to operate a spaceship and that kind of thing. And they're even able to do this with Data, an android, and they're able to do this with the Enterprise. They're able to selectively damage the Enterprise and the crew cannot access any personal information about themselves or about the Federation that would disprove this whole war thing. So, I mean, think about for a second what a feat of technology that is. I dare say that all alien races presented in Star Trek would not be able to accomplish something. Even I would postulate a species like the Dominion that are shown as being well advanced at the Federation. I still think that they would not be able to accomplish something so very specific and detailed. To have to reconfigure all these different aliens and the Enterprise to hide it from specific information about and even like once the crew was aware of who they were, they still didn't have their memories, and they were still managed to block that information, so even an engineering genius like LaForge couldn't figure out how to get to it. And this is done by an alien race that had military or weaponry technology that was centuries behind the Enterprise. They were so puny and inferior that the Enterprise could just wipe them out with one torpedo. Wipe out like the central, like the headquarters, the central military headquarters for an entire alien race that are in the middle of a century-long war. The Enterprise could wipe it out with one torpedo. Now, of course, that's the Sutherlands or whatever they're called. That's their enemy. I can't remember what they're called, but Picard mentioned at the end of the episode that the Sutherlands, I'm just calling them that, the Suttons, whatever they're called, that their technology level was equal to that of, I think it was no, it's not the Lithians, that was the telepathic dudes. I'm going to have to look this up. It's like light, I can't even remember what the fuck they were called. But anyway, they said it was equal to their technology, so they equally had puny little ships that the Enterprise could destroy their whole entire military structure with one photon torpedo. And you expect me to believe that someone with that level of technology would be able to reconfigure the entire Enterprise crew, including data, and withhold this information from the Enterprise? Nope. I'm sorry. That is the biggest load of horseshit I've ever seen. Now, I've heard some people try to excuse it. Oh, well, they just specialize. They specialize in memory erasure and computer erasure. Yeah, and they specialize so much that they're able to wipe out an alien starship that's like super, super, super way more advanced than them and withhold all specific information, also changing all these specific alien... No, I'm sorry. That makes no sense. The whole concept of this episode is just a big, gigantic ball of nonsense. And it's really hard for me to get over that fact. And plus, leaving all that aside, let's get into DUFF Man's plan. Like, his master plan was to use the Enterprise to destroy this alien race, and by making them believe that the Federation was at war with this alien race, which is such a stupid concept that eventually did in fact fail because it was so blatantly obvious to everyone on the ship that the Federation would not be involved in a century-long war with a race that their technology is far superior than. Like, they're able to destroy the whole military structure with one photon torpedo. Now, eventually, that is what tips them off, and Riker and Picard's like, well, this is off, and that's right. But, of course they're going to be that way. Like, why did DUFF Man actually think that would work? Like, it's common sense. Like, I'm actually kind of think it was unrealistic that it took them that long to realize that there's no fucking way in hell that their Federation could be at war with someone that had technology that was so incredibly inferior to theirs. It's preposterous. Also, here's a huge question I have, and I've always had this. So, DUFF Man, when he brings up the crew manifests or files or whatever, he puts himself as the first officer and Riker as the second officer. I got a question. Excuse me. I got a question here. Why didn't he make himself the captain? So the show could happen. I'm sorry. Why didn't he just make himself the captain? Like, at the end of the episode, Picard overrules him, and he's like, I'm taking control of the ship. Hey, moron, why didn't you take control of the ship in the first place? Why didn't you put yourself as the captain? It's not like, oh, maybe people couldn't buy that he was the captain. Picard's too much. Well, they bought he was the first officer when Riker's supposed to be the first officer. So why wouldn't they buy him as the captain? I think they fucking would buy. In fact, they made Worf the captain before, which I'll get to that shortly. So why didn't he just make himself the captain? DUFF Man likes to be the first officer. Ooh, yeah. It makes no sense. None of this. None of the plot. So that's the whole entire plot of this episode. Is just a big, gigantic ball of nonsense. And as I said, they could do something way more interesting with the plot like that, which they did do in the Voyager episode Nemesis. So what should I tackle next? Should I tackle the fact that Troi beat Data at chess? No, she didn't. I don't care what the fuck this episode tries to tell me. She did not defeat Data at chess. That did not happen. She's like, oh, chess is a game of intuition and ingenuity. No, it's not. And not only, like, she did a move that Data didn't protect. I'm sorry, Data is able of, like, infinite calculations. There's no fucking way that she would do a move that Data can protect. And why is she, like, she had made a bet that he would make this drink for her that only he can make. Why does she need to bet him to do that? Why would he refuse to do it? Like, no, I'm too lazy. I don't feel like making this drink for you. I don't know. Anywho, let me talk about Worf now. Yeah, it's a fun little bit. Ooh, isn't that funny? Haha, they think Worf's the captain, and he's like, oh, I want to get the ship ready for battle and start phasers and blah, blah, blah. You know, and I admit it was kind of funny, kind of interesting. But I don't buy it for a second. Alright, so this is the logic they use here. So they all lose their memories and they're on the bridge, and Riker goes to Picard and says, it looks at his 4 pips on his collar. It's like, oh, you're decorated more, so I think you're the leader. And Worf is like, oh, look at this thing I'm wearing. Oh, I'm also seem to be decorated. Maybe I'm the leader. Okay, point of correction. Let me point something out. And right, also in that same exact scene, Roland was sitting at the helm, and she turns around and she punches in the helm. She's like, oh, I'm sitting at the helm. I must be the helm officer. Good deductive reasoning. LaForge is by the engineering station. Oh, hey, I'm the engineer. Well, hey, guess what? Who was sitting in the captain's chair? Fucking Jean-Luc Picard. And who was next to him? Riker. So there, and they deduced later that the captain's chair is the center of command because Worf was sitting in that and was in the command. Well, when they lost their memories, was Worf sitting in that fucking chair? No, fucking Picard was. Now, if you want to be nitpicking specific, he wasn't sitting in the chair, he was standing, but he was clearly standing by the chair. He was clearly standing in the command center. And where was Worf? Worf was at the freaking tactical station. He was right in front of it, and he was operating the tactical station in the exact same manner that Ro was in front of the helm. So I don't understand why for Ro they're like, oh yeah, there's the helm, I'm the helms officer. Same fucking thing for Worf. He's in front of the tactical. Well, clearly I'm the tactical officer. and just because he has this weird thing that no one else has, where everyone has those pips, and they have less pips, he clearly has less pips than Picard, and everyone has those fucking pips, so clearly Picard's the captain, and then, oh, isn't it funny to have Worf in command? But I don't buy it. It's a bunch of bullshit, and plus, like, the whole thing was Picard was acting like the captain. It's like, they said they still retain their skills, so Ro immediately knew to operate the helm, LaForge immediately knew how to do the engineering stuff, Crusher knew immediately that she was a doctor, how to do the doctor stuff, and very clearly for anyone with half a brain could see that Picard clearly was stepping into the role of command where Worf is not, where Worf is more concerned with battle tactics. So very clearly, his thing was security and weaponry, not command. I think as the thing I buy, I almost buy that even less than I do the whole concept of the aliens. It's such an unbelievable, ridiculous concept. Just to go, oh, isn't it funny, the worst commander? But that would never happen. That's horseshit. I'm sorry, but it is. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, I mean, as I said, I don't totally hate this episode. It was, as I said, it's an interesting concept for the crew to lose their memories and have to sort of and I did enjoy some of the character interactions, to be fair, with the crew refining themselves, like Data discussing, you know, what the possibilities, is he the only android or not, and then them behaving with like no knowledge of who they were. I just think that as I said, they could have done a lot more with this concept than what they did. I think they mishandled it. I think the whole thing... Alright, let me talk a bit more about Kieran McDuff. DUFF MAN. I think it kind of ruins the episode a bit to have this character there. Now, I know he's supposed to be sort of the ominous element, where the audience is aware that, one thing does not belong here, where the crew have no idea. But it kind of fucks with the dynamic, especially making Riker the second officer. It fucks with the dynamic of how the crew would try to find themselves and how they would react with the memories lost, because now we have this one dude who's not been known to be there, and he's there. And yeah, how come Troi couldn't tell that he was an alien who was purposely deceiving them? Anywho. My rating for, hey, there's something wrong. I'm sorry. My rating for Conundrum out of 10 is a 6. Good. As I say, it's a decent episode. It's like, I'm not going to say it's a bad episode. I gave it a positive rating, but the lowest positive rating I could give it. Because even though it's an interesting concept and it was an interesting episode and there's interesting character interactions, and I maintain it's not a bad episode, but there's way too many flaws with it for me to consider this a really good episode. The whole thing with Worf made no sense. The whole main plot about DUFF MAN's race having the technology to do this to the Enterprise is total horseshit, and the fact that it took them so long to realize that, hey, we can't be out in a centuries-long war with an alien race that we can defeat in 2 seconds. Took them way too long to figure that out. And the whole Worf, Roy, Riker, Troi triangle was kind of silly. So, anyway, that is it for my review of Conundrum. I shall be back to review the other Star Trek episodes that won the poll, as well as covering many more Star Trek videos, and I also cover lots of other videos on shows like The Expanse, Better Call Saul, The Outer Limits, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.